Right.
Well,
Hello, Ed.
Drew, hi, good afternoon. Welcome to our now third virtual wine tasting, the Printhie virtual tasting series. Today we are talking about Shiraz, and in particular we have two of sort of the workhorses, I guess, of the Printhie portfolio in the Shiraz range here, the mountain range and then the
Let me pour you some.
That'd be great. As Drew's doing that, it's obviously, it's now in Orange where we are, quite a autumnal outlook. You can't see it from where we're sitting now.
Take our word for it.
Take our word for it. You drive around, the trees are turning, you start to see a bit of smoke curling from...
I've got a double layer on.
Drew's wearing singlets, and we're getting to the point where red wine's becoming the option again.
Yes.
Look, if you live in Queensland, maybe red wine all year, or
Go back to last week where we did Chardonnay.
Yeah. Look, we're heading into red wine territory, and so we decided Shiraz was the order of the day this week. The region of Orange, Drew, and Shiraz.
Yeah.
Would you equate the two together? Would you say, gee, cool climate and Shiraz? Are they a match made in heaven?
Well, it depends. Yes, but look, Australians love Shiraz. It's our great variety, and you know, to be really honest, when most people think of Aussie Shiraz, they're thinking of big, rich styles, typically from South Australia, say. And the thing to understand about Shiraz, particularly in Australia, as any variety grown in any country, is that there's regional variation. And the regional variation comes through soil, through climate, temperature, elevation.
If only there was someone who would come up with a word for that.
To what?
Oh, they've done it?
The French, apparently. You know, if you're willing to explore the wider world of Shiraz, then there's a great deal of joy to be had from a whole heap of different regions, including Orange, because we make a different style to what you get out of the warm climate regions of South Australia. So, you know, we can't produce that big, rich, over-the-top fruit. We can't put heaps of oak into it. We can't make this Shiraz bomb in your mouth. If you love that sort of style, fantastic.
Well, we discussed briefly last week around Chardonnay, you know, the difference of the 80s, early 90s Chardonnay styles.
Yep.
And then where we were making wines today.
Yep.
Would you say that, you know, Shiraz is on a bit of a similar path?
Yeah, I think there is, because I think, you know, a lot of immature, what they call immature wine markets, where, you know, wine drinking is relatively new and has to be discovered. Once you progress past that and you get some maturity into your wine market, people start looking for different things. And one of the things they move away from is the obvious to subtle complexity. And that's what you get here.
What you're suggesting is that cool climate Shiraz is more of a connoisseur's style? Would you go that far?
No, because there's plenty of connoisseurs that'll fly the flag for Barossa. But what I see it as a maturity thing. You're getting past the obvious, and you're starting to get into more medium-bodied wines, not the sledgehammer effect, and you're starting to pick up subtle complexities. You're starting to appreciate the little nuances within a wine.
Great word.
It's almost as good as terroir.
And
And then, you know, you start looking further afield, and you can go to any number of regions in Australia and find differences. And when you come to Orange, with our elevation and our cooler climate and our basalt soils, we can't, like I say, we can't grow that warm climate style of fruit, and they can't grow ours. And that's the thing to remember, you know. As much as we can't grow theirs, they can't grow ours. We have to have a much more deft hand at oak, because if we throw too much oak in it, all you get is oak. If you go for too much extraction and tannin, all you get is tannin. So you have to be sensitive to your
So do you
raw
think,
materials.
Do you think the winemakers in cool climates are better than wine?
Absolutely. There's nothing biased about that at all.
No, I didn't think there would be. Look, we speak a lot about elevation and the importance that altitude plays in a region like Orange. Where, you know, we grow Shiraz at the lower end of the
Yep.
elevation range here in Orange, from the 600 to the sort of 700 metre mark. Why is Shiraz tended to be more suited to that, you know, territory than the higher elevation stuff? Is it purely the late ripening nature of reds?
No, Shiraz is what we call an intermediate ripener. It's not particularly early, it's not late. Cabernet is late,
Yeah.
Pinot is early, Shiraz is somewhere in the middle. No, with elevation, what you're doing as you go up through the elevation, you know, in my time in Orange, I've made some Shiraz off 900 metres, which I think is about the limit of actually getting it what we call physiologically ripe. So you need ripe tannins. You don't want green tannins. You need ripe seeds, hard, crunchy, dry seeds, not green, tannic seeds. You need full colour development. If you go too high, you're not going to get those
Yep.
qualities in your fruit. So therefore, your wine's going to be thin, green, astringent.
One of the interesting differences, say, between the Chardonnay tasting we did last week and this one, is the Chardonnay last week was a lower elevation fruit sauce and then a high elevation
Yep.
fruit sauce, whereas these Shirazes
Same vineyard.
same vineyard even.
Yeah.
And I guess we can get to where the difference lies, you know, as we talk about each
Yep.
one. In terms of the mountain range Shiraz, I mean, it sits in that range of wines where we want fruit expression, we want
Fruit is
bright,
the primary
fresh,
thing.
clean.
Yep.
You know, they're not overly oaked. The
No.
oak is very much a background,
Subtle.
you know, subtle
Yep.
scenario.
It's about brightness, fresh fruit. It's about not being a challenge to your palate. Some wines require more attention than others. So you know, at recommended retail price of $22 and widely available. Quite happily a bit. We're trying to
Gosh, that's really good.
bargain value. We're just trying to please a lot of people.
Yep.
More people than say Super Duper Syrah, which we make, and we'll come back to Syrah, which we make in 2 barrels worth, 600 litres. And you know, some people love it, and some people go, yeah, it's not convincing. That's okay. There's only 600 litres of it. It's,
that's
you
right.
know, 100 cases. So, but mountain range, look, great everyday drinking that, you know, you suddenly realise that the bottle's empty.
Yeah. What I notice when we tend to harvest, you know, in our Shiraz vineyards, we tend to pick larger volumes of this at a time.
Yep.
We ferment in larger volumes.
Yep.
You know, and it tends to be done just in bigger batches, I guess.
Well, we're very specific when we go to harvest a variety, say Shiraz, out of the same block, but we've got 2 different wines in mind. We're doing 2 completely different things. It's just not a matter of.
This is news to me, by the way.
So yes, we do harvest in. So the difference, given they come out of the same vineyard, maybe different blocks, but the same vineyard, is the way that they made once they're harvested. So you know, yes, mountain range comes in larger volumes, goes into bigger ferment tanks, and sees a bit of oak, but not entirely oak. Some of it stays in tank. So it's made. Would you call it a simple? It's certainly less labour intensive because it costs less, but in a slightly simpler way, yes.
And 2017 is the vintage that we've got in front of us now.
Yep.
How would you characterise 17 as a vintage for Orange?
17 was it was weather-wise. It had its warm patches, as every vintage seems to have these days. But it wasn't strikingly hot. Certainly 18 was warmer
Yeah.
and 16 was warmer.
I remember winter of 16 was very, very wet here in Orange.
Yeah.
And it rained all winter.
So we got really good canopy.
So the vines took off, at the get-go.
Yep.
But then it finished quite dry and warm.
It finished dry and warm.
Which is probably nearly perfect.
Perfect.
Would it be fair to say this was a vintage of the century?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, if you take the Murray Tyrrell, Bruce Tyrrell, quote, every vintage is the vintage of the century.
It's certainly a wine that's performed really nicely and looks really smart.
Look, it's the current release. It's bright, it's fresh, it's easy to drink. Doesn't suck your cheeks in with tannin, which is perfect because that's not what we're trying to do.
No.
There's no point in me overthinking it all and wanting to produce a great wine and say to you guys, this will be great in 10 years, because in 10 years it'll all be gone.
Yeah.
Us at the winery with a small museum stock.
What's the statistic on most wine purchased is consumed within
48 hours?
48 hours, something really fast anyway.
So I don't know how you guys, buy your wine. Some people do buy it and put it in some storage and go back to it now and again and pick out a bottle. Other people, there's plenty of people, and I'd say most people, buy a case of wine, drink the case of wine, go and buy another case of wine.
But I guess the point to make on this one is it is essentially made in a more drink now kind of style.
Having said that, in 5 years' time, it changes and it evolves.
Correct.
And it looks great, but we have absolutely no pretense about it that most of you guys out there basically just want to buy it and drink it. So we make it for that consumption.
Sounds pretty good. Anyway, I've nearly finished my glass. How does yours taste?
Yeah.
Good. So the interesting part is, as we mentioned before, is that this topography version comes from the same vineyard.
Yep.
Now, how on earth can these wines be different and so vastly different if they come from the same place?
Grapes are 90% of wine. And what we call winemaking artifice, which is what I do, I add bits and pieces. That's essentially the difference. So, like we're saying, bigger volumes, bigger ferments. Topography comes in small batches. It goes into small, open fermenters. They get hand plunged rather than pumped over. They often sit in the fermenter for much longer, up to about 4 weeks. They do get some hand-picked whole bunch fruit that goes in there, which gives a completely different texture and tannin profile. There's a portion of it goes into brand new French oak barrels, more expensive, more labour-intensive work.
And I guess the thing to note straight away is, on the nose, you can pick some of that French oak influence straight away.
Absolutely.
I mean, doing all my background reading for today's session, I noticed by reading the tasting notes for this wine that we do talk about a large diversity of fermentation techniques.
Yes.
Now, in 100 words or less, so we don't all go to sleep.
Yep.
But fermentation
techniques.
Have
I put anyone to sleep yet?
What exactly are we talking about in terms of fermentation techniques?
Right, so that's how much whole bunches you have in there, what yeast you use. You may use natural yeast or dried commercial yeast.
And natural yeast being just the yeast that exists
comes in
with the grapes
because it's in the vineyard. How long it spends on skins, how often it gets plunged, usually twice a day, but it might be more, might be less. What type of oak it goes into. There's whole heaps of different little things that you can do, and they'll come out in slightly different ways. So what you're trying to do by having lots of little differences in your fermentation and your maturation is have lots of little differences in the resulting wine that you can then pick and choose when it comes to blending.
Yeah, and certainly one of the big differences I've noted in my time since being back involved in the wine business is
just a mere 15, 16, 17 years.
Something like that. Is when we first went out, and the Shiraz was ready to pick, we'd go out and we'd pick it all. and we bring it all in,
Yeah.
and we might split that into two big fermenters, and we had two resulting wines to blend together.
Yeah.
Today, you know, we probably pick in, I don't know, how many different bits and bobs.
Oh, 6, 7, 8.
6, 7, 8. Then they go into smaller portions for fermentation. Then they get different fermentation techniques. So we end up with an absolute myriad of
I consider
blending alternatives.
when it comes to blending, and all through the maturation process, I consider every barrel a
As an
different batch.
individual. Yep.
So our barrels hold either 300 litres or 500 litres, and I consider every barrel to be independently assessed and to see what it would be worth or contribute to a blend. And it may, if it doesn't make the grade, it may go down a level.
Yep. Downgrade.
Down a grade.
Now,
So-
we just had a question about, you know, what museum stocks do we offer consumers?
Sadly, no.
Sadly,
yet,
not
not
many.
yet.
Not many. One of the things we are trying to do though is put some good offers on some older vintages to like our wine club members, and we make those offers occasionally. We hold a few things back. We held a bit of a 15 super duper Cabernet back for members, and because it sort of went like that. So the plan is to do a little bit of that, but currently not an awful lot. This
There is
topography.
a couple of vintages of Shiraz in Magnum that I
Yeah,
imagine
that's
Ed
true.
has some plan for.
But
you know,
yes, you've just reminded me.
but that's the only thing in my time is
There is,
Shiraz that has gone into Magnum.
Yep, large format.
Mm.
There's we did it too. 12 and 13 vintage
Yes.
got 99 bottles each.
Yeah.
So yes, stay tuned. There will be something down the track in relation to that.
And another quick question I'll jump in with, it's from Mark, who's on Facebook. How much of the difference in the two wines is driven by the different vintages?
It's always plays a part.
Yeah.
Now, is it the biggest difference? Probably not. But vintage variation is certainly something, particularly in the topography range, where we're really happy to have, you know, vintage variation. Mountain range, we probably want it to look a bit similar
Bit
year
more
to year,
consistent.
you know, stylistically.
Yep.
But you know, 16. This is a 2016, so immediately we've got another 12 months maturation period. That's another 12 months for it to soften and settle into its, you know, new home. But it's really hard to compare these two wines just based on vintage.
Yeah,
alone.
it is. It's a bit like comparing an apple and an orange from different vintages because they're made different ways for different purposes. And look, you know, vintages are pretty consistent, and viticulture has improved enough that there is more consistency in the quality of the grapes. Back in the dark old days, vintage variation was far more dramatic because, you know, we just weren't equipped and didn't have the knowledge to deal with it viticulturally. The last wet vintage, the last, you know, awful vintage that we had was 2011. You know, and that was really hard work, and there was a massive amount of vintage variation. A little side note, we did win the trophy for Best Shiraz at the Orange Wine Show for the Shiraz.
2011.
Back then, the MCC the Shiraz. So you got to make good wine even in a dog year. But, you know, yeah, vintage variation. Look, the run of vintages we've had in the last 5 years have all been pretty consistent with a consistent variety like Shiraz. You know, Shiraz is pretty resilient to a lot of variations.
It also performs well over, you know, a number of different sites and spots. So
Mind
can
you,
choose it.
if you had a really wet vintage like 11,
Yep.
you would notice it.
Absolutely, yeah. One of the things I did notice in 11 was the high amount of peppery spice character.
Never made such a spicy
It came
Shiraz in all my life
Yeah.
as 2011.
And we certainly see that. We certainly see in the cooler years the Shiraz definitely has a spicier.
Yeah, look, and
element
that's
to
probably
the
the biggest way to recognise variation, vintage variation in something like Printhie Shiraz is that spice is a good indicator. If you're really picking up, you know, the black peppercorn clovey notes, then you're probably in a slightly cooler year. And if you're picking up less of that and more darker fruits, then you're in a riper year. And certainly 18 shows you a riper year.
Yeah. we got asked on the leading to this.
A question in advance. There's a good idea.
Question in advance. to just cover off Shiraz and Syrah.
Right, that's easy.
Yeah.
So, it'll be a shock to a lot of you, given that most of you are in Australia and drink Shiraz. We are the only people in the world that call it Shiraz. So,
Can't be true.
'cause
Is it named after the city in Iraq?
not at all. So, the rest of the world calls it Syrah. And if you go to the home of Shiraz in the northern Rhone Valley, you don't even see Syrah on the label. You get Hermitage and Côte-Rôtie and Cornas and Gros Hermitage, Saint Joseph. They don't even put
Shiraz.
Syrah on the label. New Zealand calls it Syrah. America calls it Syrah. We're it. So there is no difference. It's like Pinot Green, Pinot Grigio. Same grape variety, a different name.
We use Syrah on one wine.
Yep.
On the Super Duper, and we do it to indicate more of a style,
Yes.
stylistic direction.
Yep.
So we say that there's a style difference, and we're trying to separate ourselves from the robust Aussie Shiraz,
Yes.
mate, and put ourselves more in a European styling. You know.
Well, it's interesting. You know, yes, a lot of people these days use Syrah. Most, I presume, as a stylistic indicator. So
Direction.
yes, with Super Duper Syrah, it's saying, look, you should not expect this to be anything like McLaren Vale Shiraz.
Yep.
It's at the other end. Stylistically, it's really interesting with that wine in particular. If you put it in a bunch of Aussie Shiraz in a tasting, it looks really European. And if you put it in a tasting lineup with a whole bunch of French Syrah from the Rhone, it looks really Aussie.
Yeah.
So, you know, but that's the main reason to do it. Saying, look, and the intention of the Super Duper Syrah, part of the intention was for it to be Shiraz, but to be a different interpretation of Printhie Shiraz, and therefore, you know, spanning that out, a different interpretation of Australian Shiraz. So that's all it is.
No, that was only 470 words. That was really well done.
I held myself back.
And we've actually got someone watching from New York today.
Hello, hope you're well.
One of your friends, Ev Starrock.
Ah,
He's wondering
excellent.
if he can get Printhie over there, but unfortunately...
I'd have to bring it over there myself. It's about the only way we can get that one there.
And we've also had a question from Fiona on Facebook. How did we come up with the name Printhie?
It was a bit of not reinventing the wheel, to be honest. Printhie is the property name where I grew up, and at the time we started out just in viticulture. We had a vineyard. We didn't really need a name. The fruit got grown and sold and went elsewhere. When the time came to put a label on a bottle for ourselves, rather than trying to come up with another creek or a crossing or a
Bend or a
bend or something, we decided we'd just go with the property name. And so Printhie was our property name. It has been that since mid-1930s. We don't really know the origins.
Isn't it an extinct goanna?
Well, we think it's an extinct goanna. They were obviously slow and good and
Tasty.
because they're no longer around.
And if it is, it's the clash of the critters, you know, because we've got the bird
Yeah, we do have the bird.
and we've got the goanna. But
Yeah.
the goanna doesn't get a look in you know, a motif.
No, the goanna's a bit hard. That sort of does hit the critter
Yes, it does.
critter label type thing. You
And
know.
the bird, you know, just because it did take me a little while to work out when I first started working here, is a swift after the family name, and hence the swift sparkling.
Now, there's
Keep your questions coming in.
Yeah,
We're
yeah.
deep into question time.
in terms of the specifics around that wine and the tasting of it. What I love about our topography Shiraz and that tier is just the finesse and I love that we're in red fruit territory. You know, it's not dark, it's not jammy.
No,
You know, it's very much a bright, fresh, but carries on. You know, palate just goes.
to some degree, the same principle applies. You know, this is a large portion of this is sold in restaurants, or it was before our current situation. So it was a lot of what we call on-premise in restaurants and bars and what have you. So again, people aren't going to cellar it. It certainly has more robustness and a more tannin length.
So we're certainly making this to cellar.
Certainly capable of going 10 years, no problem.
Yeah.
And the structure indicates that. But by the same token, made knowing that on-premise is a big part of the market for this wine, and you know, it's got to be interesting. It can capture your attention a little bit more. And certainly, maybe, you know, the old term bistro style is that, you know...
French bistro
style where, you know, you sit down and happily share a bottle and go, geez, that was bloody delicious. I'd like some for home.
Coq au vin.
A bit of coq au vin would be nice, especially in this weather.
It's just got that sit in front of the fire. Our good assistant here has been pushing me to light a fire. And I reckon...
Way too early. It's not the end of April yet.
It's not Anzac Day yet.
No.
And I think when we do that, when I finally get some timber to do that, I'll be drinking some of this.
This would be perfect.
Yeah, in front of the fire.
Perfect.
Now, looking ahead from the next week's tastings...
Get your orders in so we can get them delivered to you.
We are having a bit of a delay with some of the Aussie Post deliveries. They are taking some time. So if you are keen to join in the future tastings. Now, the wonderful assistant, has put all those up on the website, and you will have seen them go through on the socials as well. The first week, next week, is Pinot Gris.
So there's two
Pinot Gris, and we discussed before the different Shiraz Syrah. We're going to do, we call it Pinot Gris, but it's our two interpretations of Gris. One's more Gris than the other.
They're both called Pinot Gris.
One's Gris.
We don't have a Pinot Grigio.
No, we don't. Pinot Gris, then some Cabernets the week following. We're going to do a Pinot Meunier, due to some lots of questions being raised on that variety, and then a Rosé on the week following that one, which is an interesting one as well due to its makeup. So ensure that you get your orders in time for that. Now,
remember, free delivery.
There's free delivery, but we've also got this groovy little sign we made up. So that
Literally just made up.
So that people can get down the details. We do offer a little bit of a discount for all you good people who are watching right now.
More to this side. In fact, let's just do that.
And
then you can stop the frame and you can do a screenshot of it, and you've got all the details permanently.
So the coupon code is Friday Tasting.
Friday Tasting.
I'm reading this backwards through the paper. 15% off and free shipping. That's delivery, and I think that's Australia-wide.
Yes, Australia-wide.
Not to New York.
Until 10 p.m. on Sunday.
10 p.m. on Sunday. So look, as we said, Australia Post is lagging a little bit, which I think with all the online shopping people are doing, not just for Printhie Wine, is sort of flooding the system a bit, and they're a little bit swamped. So the sooner you get it in...
They told me today they are busier than Christmas.
Right, there you go. That's because you can't go to the shopping centre and you're doing it all on your laptop.
Now, I've got another question that's come in. What is your favourite meal to enjoy your Shiraz with? And who cooks it?
Ooh. Who asked that question?
Oh, you know, Ossobuco, my wife cooks it.
Oh, Ossobuco. Gosh, I'm going to have to come up with something fancy now.
Especially it's got the gremolata on top.
Oh. No, probably a beef casserole or something. Beef cheeks even, we had some the other day.
Beef burgundy.
Oh, wow, beef bourguignon.
Bourguignon.
No, some sort of beef dish for me with Shiraz, I quite like. And mostly the good assistant makes that.
No.
Yeah. She's good at that. Now, sorry for having two of me today, too, by the way.
Dave says hello as well.
We did have Dave. We did have Dave coming. Now, we do have we decided who's doing next week's tasting at this stage?
I don't think we have actually.
So next week's...
I'll volunteer.
She gets called assistant again.
Look.
It's a bit like the Stig on
yeah.
you know.
And then we've got Matt from Green Moustache saying hi. on Facebook.
Hello.
Does he have a
Hello.
question?
Any questions?
No, just saying hi.
In terms of, this is probably, we discussed last week about Chardonnay being the most consistent variety that we do here in Orange, and it's the one that makes up the biggest class in the wine show and stuff. Shiraz is probably that next one, isn't it?
Look, this is my personal opinion. Shiraz is the most consistent red wine variety across different vintages, different producers and different elevations in Orange. Which is not to say that Cabernet can't be grape grown in the right place and Pinot can't be grape grown in the right place, but Shiraz has the ability to go across a larger range of elevation, and I think it's just more consistent across different producers in the region and in different vintages. It's just, Shiraz, to tell you the truth, is a bit of a weed. You know, it
grows pretty well.
It's vigorous, it grows well. It's not especially hard to ripen. You can sort of abuse it a bit and it still produces good wine for you. A lot of other varieties are far more temperamental than Shiraz.
Saying that, I mean, over the years we've adjusted our practices in the vineyard quite a lot.
Yep.
You know, from early days cane pruning to now most of our better stuff coming off our spur pruned sections. So we do, despite the fact that it's easy to grow, there's still a lot of manipulation and management. You know, that's involved there.
It's easy to grow.
It's not,
and get
I
at
don't
base
want,
level.
I don't want Charlie and Dave taking some sort of accolades that they don't deserve. But
No, you still got to work hard with it, but it's certainly a little bit more, robust and forgiving than other varieties. Even humble old Merlot needs a lot more work than.
absolutely, yeah.
And
that's
we've also got someone celebrating a birthday today. So happy birthday to Tennille, who's watching.
super.
Happy birthday.
Well, I hope you're having.
And people are wondering if the assistant has a name.
It's been mentioned several times. Pay attention, people.
It's just the assistant. A bit, as Drew said, she's a bit like the Stig.
The Stig.
Yeah.
Maybe if she doesn't like being called the assistant, maybe we just start calling her the Stig.
No, she does
and then
a very good job.
another quick question: is it the alluvial soils in Orange that helps Shiraz prosper?
No alluvial soil, sorry.
No.
It's all volcanic basalt.
Yeah, most of it,
which did run in rivers when Canobolis was exploding.
but not due to the method of water running.
No water involved. It was really hot.
Lava.
Yes. So there's essentially, to my understanding, two types of basalt soils here. One is lava flow, and there's literally rivers of that through the topography of the region. And then there's also soil that's been deposited from the sky when the top has blown, and they're different. And people who are really into soils can differentiate them. I'm no expert on that. And there are some little patches of granite in the region, but if you
going east,
there's a bit more.
Yeah.
But if you go drive around the region, for those that have been here, and you occasionally come across a hillside or a little mound, and you'll see heaps of rocks exposed through the soil sitting on the top of a hill. That's actually limestone. I just assumed it was granite when I first came to the region, but it's limestone. So our limestone appears, again, I'm no expert, a little bit different to, say, Coonawarra, which is in a decomposed bedrock layer. The limestone around here, and maybe it's because the volcanic activity has sort of fragmented and basically sits in boulders. So if you go and dig a hole, you'll dig up boulders of limestone.
Yeah, there was obviously a lot of some sort of tectonic activity at some point, because often it's vertical and on the surface as opposed to being flat and under a lot of other stuff. The soils are a very important and interesting part of growing, and certainly this site here, we're up at Nashdale at Millwood. This has some of the most unbelievable soils I've seen anywhere.
Bright and red,
to be honest, and soils that just keep giving. I mean, I've spoken to old orchardists here who have said they've not put anything ever back into after 100 years of growing fruit crops.
And
So-
they're still going.
And they're still going. So it's pretty specky spot. So you better. come and
However,
visit.
if you had Shiraz, for instance, and right next door to each other, I mean, I don't know where this occurs, but if you could do it, and you had granite and you had basalt and you had alluvial soils there and everything else was the same, you would have 3 different wines.
Correct.
So
That's a good experiment.
you better start importing the soil by the truckload.
We might
all right.
start to wrap it up there, but
Yep.
I'd just like to say thank you for all the words of support to the assistant. Thank you.
The stig, get it right, people.
Oh, listen. On a proper note, this wouldn't happen without the assistant.
Oh no, because
We
I
don't-
turned up 5 minutes before. And
We don't just look this good all the time. It's due to the assistant's good work behind the scenes. But look, thank you for tuning in again. As we said, there is now another tasting pack online to purchase for the future tastings, and
pretty good value, I hear.
yep, excellent value, and free delivery. Put that in as a coupon code. Friday tasting for anyone who wants any of these wines, and I think it goes across all the wines, does it not? But just for a small amount of time. And save any more questions. I think we might be done for today. Actually, the only thing I was going to mention is that quiet?
There's no rain.
There's no
It's
rain. There's no rain today. Last 2 Fridays, it's bucketed down and caused us lots of headaches. And today, it's beautiful. So, look, on that note, thank you, everyone. Lovely to have you here again. And we look forward to seeing you.
Drink well,
next
drink
Friday.
sensibly, and see you next week.